afternoon. Thank you for coming. Before I started the talk, I'd like to thank my co-authors. I have worked with several of them, and also I have a working group actually working on topics. And unfortunately, they cannot come because some of them is in Asia and some of them in Europe, in different countries. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to present our work, and also thank you for attending this session. As we know, the security risk assessment early and often it's through products life cycle is very important. I work for a company called Thales. At Thales, we have been doing that risk assessment for many years. So the risk level, instead of vulnerability levels, which you get from your security scans, have guided our product teams to manage risk and prioritize tasks. Some of you might remember several years ago, I have talked about lessons learned in risk assessment, right? And those are the things we've done, and we'll say, don't do this. And certain things we have done, which is really helpful, we said do those. So we had a list of things. So today, I'm going to share with you some more insight of how we do risk assessment and how we evaluate risk and our recent work in improving the risk evaluation, okay? So I'm a security person. I'm also an inventor. Now I have more patents since, I have 30 plus granted US patents. LOSCON is very special for me, and because I joined the team who started LOSCON from the very beginning, and I've been here since then. So it's, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. You can tell I'm a little bit nervous. I'm more comfortable to speak in a room than on the stage. So let's go to our topic. So this is our outline. We are going to talk very briefly about security risk assessment, just to set up a foundation for the later parts. As I know, probably many of you have done risk assessment. Actually, let me ask, can you please raise your hand if you have done risk assessment? Please. Yeah, so we have many people have done risk assessment, and some of you have not done so, so I will take a middle ground to have some introduction. For those who have done or expertise in risk assessment, you may correct me if I say something wrong. And then we'll talk about as an example, talk about how we are doing it as the process and the tool. And then we'll focus on the risk calculation. We can talk about the current risk calculation, and we'll also talk about what we have been doing research and what we're thinking, how we're going to do it. All right, and another note, the work we presented here was the work we've done last year, and then we submit to LOSCON earlier this year. Since then, CVSS CVS V4 public review has been published in summer, June this year. We are studying it, but it's not included in our risk calculation yet. It may be in the future. Okay, so as we know, software products provide services and for many different kind of services. And also it possesses assets, data, right? And the service itself, they are also assets. These products and the services have to be compliant to security standards and the regulations, including privacy regulations as well. And as we also know, that's why we are here, right? All the products commonly have vulnerabilities. Can anyone name a product that doesn't have vulnerability? And so, yeah, almost all products have vulnerabilities. So that will lead exploitation to compromise, non-compliance, loss of assets, loss of business. All those bad things can happen. So we all use security scan tools. Those tools can identify vulnerabilities in the implementation, right? Or in the APIs, but that's implementation. So when you run a security scan, you often have a long list of issues, right? And which one do you fix, right? Due to the resource constraints, you have to pick and choose to prioritize. How do you do that, right? And the products may also have weakness or flaws in designs. That's why we do threat modeling, right? And those are the things not captured by scans. So, but we need to address them before we implement. Otherwise, we waste our time to implement a flawed design. So all these would require risk assessment, which is very important to make sure we have the right design to be able to prioritize and to make decisions. So now we want to ask, what is a risk? And preparing this talk, I did many readings of different standards, and there are many lengthy definitions of risks, very precise, but I decided to use simple ones that easier to understand. So according to the dictionary, risk is a probability of something bad happening. Make sense? And so from a software perspective, risk is a potential that an attacker could cause harm or loss to an asset, right? When we say asset, it can be data or it can be our services. So that's the risk we are talking about. And so we do risk assessment, not only for the purpose I said earlier, to prioritize the task and et cetera. And from the business perspective, the information security risk assessment is also an enabler, right? In a company, you have management, you have CEOs, top management. You also have product management. You have developers, engineering teams. You have operations. You have QA people. You have different kind of people. And there's marketing and the sales, right? And so risk is actually, the risk assessment is actually a communication tool because risk is a word everyone can understand, right? And so it enables to bring up the awareness to the risk so that it can be addressed, right? And also make management accountable, right? Cannot blame everything to engineering. By the way, I'm an engineer, right? So I'm just talk from the engineering perspective. And so make the management accountable and making conscious decisions and help us to prioritize tasks and in limited resources. And also it help us to be compliant to industry standard and the regulations. So how does the risk related to the software? So when we're developing software, we have requirements, right? And for functional requirements, as well as security requirements. Sometimes we call it security objectives. So fundamentally, the objectives would include confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, authorization, and non-repudiation, right? Those are the fundamental security properties we want to maintain in our software products. Failing to each of them, failing to reach these security objectives could cause security risks. And the security risks in the product can lead to business risks. For example, financial damage, the privacy violation, reputation damage, and non-compliance violation, right? To name a few. So even it's the security risk that results in business risks. Then how do we assess them? There are many different risk assessment framework. So, for example, the international standard is ISO 27005. That's pretty much we follow, and there are common criteria. There's some others. There's NIST guideline and the OWASP risk evaluation calculation. And I want to mention CVSS. Many of us will look at the vulnerabilities. Sometimes it's the third-party vulnerabilities, third-party libraries we use in our product will have vulnerabilities that's evaluated using the CVSS score, and sometimes it's probably our own products also have vulnerabilities. So the CVSS, they have different parts, but mostly we use the base score. The base score represent the technical severity of a vulnerability. It considers the attribute of the vulnerability itself. It does not represent the risks this vulnerability related to your product. So I want to distinguish it. When you do your third-party security scan, right? For example, you use Black Duck to scan your software. You may see a whole bunch of things. There's many of them may be listed as high, the severity level as a high. Now you need to decide which one do I fix, right? And well, if you have resources to fix all of them, update all the library, that's great. If you don't have, you will have to decide which one. And the CVSS score should not be the only criteria you use to decide which one to work first. You want to do at least some quick risk assessment to decide which one has the biggest risk for your product, okay, not the library itself. And how do we assess risk? So I'm going to, as an example, as a reference also, to talk about how we do it. We basically based on the ISO 27005. And so I'm going to describe the basic process. And I mean, it's kind of standard. There's nothing secret, really. And also, I'll describe briefly the tool. So this is the model we have, again, based on the ISO standard. And this model describes relationships of different parties. And in the middle, you can see we have business asset and supporting asset. With, in general, we normally, in risk assessment, we talk about asset, but based on the ISO standard, we actually separate the business asset versus supporting asset. Here, the business asset can be data you want to protect, and also the service you want to protect. You want your service to be available 24/7, Those are business assets. Supporting assets are those that support your business activities. For example, a server, a web server you're running, or even cloud service, or the network. Those are supporting assets. And so the vulnerability is typically, it's at the supporting asset. Okay, that's why we see the vulnerability applying to a supporting asset. It may be the weakness of the implementation of the web server or certain functionalities of the web server, or it may be the weakness in your network. So the vulnerability applies to the supporting asset. And then because the vulnerability is there, the threat agent, let's say attackers, right, adversaries, they'll make a threat to the vulnerability, make a threat to exploit the vulnerability. The target of the threat would be your business asset. For example, people want to, the bad guys want to steal data or interrupt your service or steal the service, right? And so that would lead to the risk, right? The risk will impact your business asset. The risk is mitigated by controls, right? And so the business asset is protected by these controls. Make sense? Right. So that's our risk model. And then with this model, how do we assess and mitigate risks? And this is pretty much standard, right? How do we do it? First, we need to figure out what do we want to protect. That's very important. Whenever you do risk assessment, the first thing you want to ask is what do we really want to protect, right? And we're not talking about general risk, but these specific things we're doing risk assessment. So for that, we have to know the product. What is the product doing? What's the architecture? And so on and so forth. And identify the assets we want to protect and their properties. So again, the asset, we have business asset and we have supporting asset. And then we think about what can go wrong. That's where we do threat modeling, right? When you design a product or you're adding a new features, right? You want to do threat modeling and to make sure we have considered all the situations, all the possibilities. And then we assess when we identify the threat, we want to assess the impact, the likelihood, and then that gives us the risk. And the third question you will ask is what do we do, right? We can propose mitigations and then make decisions. Make decisions will be risk management decisions. It's not necessary you fix all the problems, and you typically we have options, right? That's a business decision. So you can decide we'll fix it, or we decide we'll avoid it. Then it's just like we don't do this. Let's not do this. For example, you have a product. Now you want to decide, do we want to have a backdoor or not, right? Do we want to be able to support when there's some problem? That's typically a harder problem, right? But everybody have to face the problem. There's a risk you have a backdoor, and do you want to do it or not do it? If something happens to the product, you want to just simply, if a hardware product, if you can simply ship back, or you want to have a backdoor. You want to do risk assessment to decide how you want to do it. So we ask ourselves several questions. That's how we do risk assessment. It's an iterative process. And and also you go through the whole product life cycle. You may do it at the beginning when you just design it. And then when you add new features, throughout the product life cycle, you want to do risk assessment until it's end of the life. It's real end of life. It's not I'm announcing it will be end of life for next year, but even this period, you still there's something may still happen. Somebody find some problem with this end-of-life product, right? And it's still live there. So you will still need to decide to fix or not to fix. That's when you do risk assessment. So practically, in order to do risk assessment and the risk management, we have internally developed a tool. And so we have used this tool for over 10 years. And during this period, we've been gradually, continuously improving this tool. And recently, we have, this tool is open sourced, very recently. A month ago or 2 months ago, but it's very recently. I'm going to, so one of the co-author, he couldn't come, he recorded a video. I'll show you the video. Oh, so I'm glad I worried you cannot see it. See it? Okay. So it's audio all the way.
Doing technical risks on software. Hello, everybody. So my name is Carl-Éric Coderre. I'm from Thales DIS, and I'll be doing a quick overview of the security risk assessment tool we use internally in Thales DIS for doing technical risks on software projects. So as you can see, the tool is composed of several tabs that we go through to do the risk assessment. So the first tab is the welcome tab that has a reminder on the process to do a risk assessment. Then after that, the project context tab is where you explain the project itself and some assumptions, for example, on the trust boundaries. Then after that, you have the business assets tab where you describe the business assets which are important from a business perspective. So here in our mobile banking application, it's user credentials. And for each business asset, you associate it with a security properties and you rate them. Once you have this done, then after that, you can actually do architecture diagram, which is optional, and associate them with the supporting assets, where the supporting assets are the places where the business assets will flow through. So here we define a few. Okay? And then after that, you link each business asset to supporting assets. Okay? Once this is done, then after that, you can start preparing your risks. So you can define several risks, and for each risk, you define the threat agent, who would do the potential attack, the kind of threat, stealing, deny access, tamper with, for example. Okay. Then what kind of business asset they're targeting, and how or which supporting asset they will compromise to target the business asset. And you describe the motivation. Then for each risk, you can define the likelihood. Okay. Here, then you can define also the attack paths based on the vulnerability tabs that I'll show later. With these attack paths, you can support and/or operators. Once this is done, you get your score, your risk score, and you can define security controls and how much they will mitigate the risk. And then after that, you can decide what you do with the mitigations or the actual risk. You can avoid it, share, reduce, or retain, as defined in ISO 27005. You also here in the vulnerabilities tab define the different weaknesses of vulnerabilities. Okay, and here for each one, you define the CVSS score. We used internally the CVSS tree calculator that you can find online for each different weaknesses or vulnerability. And finally, once you have all the risks placed and the decisions done, you can find a summary report of all the risks that you can export to PDF. You can find more information on the GitHub Security Risk Assessment tool under Thales Group, where the software can be downloaded freely. Any comments and feedback are welcome. Thank you very much for your time.
So that's the tool we have and recently open sourced. All right, thank you. All right, so now let's look at it. In the tool itself, it has a calculator built in to calculate the risk. This tool, it will ask you a set of questions, and then you answer those questions. We also, as we saw in the one of the pages, it lists all the business assets. So for each business asset, you want to specify the security properties, which include confidentiality, integrity, availability, and so on. And for each one, you can select this is confidentiality is critical, so you can select different values on this business asset. And then with that, you can also specify vulnerabilities. There's a vulnerability page. And then when you look at the risk page, there's a general expression. It's basically say, as an attacker, I want to attack this business asset, exploring these vulnerabilities, and etc. There's explicit expression built in, and you answer all the questions. It gives you out a score. Okay, so I'd like to show you, or you can go to open source page to look at it, to see how the risk is calculated. We see some other tools, they give you like a medium, low, high, right? And they have this map, and one of the talk was showing. Here, we're actually doing some more of quantitative calculation and with numbers. So what you see here, as we said, risk is a potential that attacker could cause harm or loss of asset. So the asset is a business asset. So the equation we have here is risk equals to impact and multiply the likelihood plus vulnerability. So this is a little bit unusual because normally what you see the risk equation is risk equal to impact and likelihood, right? And so this tool was built before my time, and we can guess why is this. And there are actually good reasons for doing it. One is to highlight and emphasize vulnerability. And especially the tool we have, we can link the vulnerability with the risk, right? With the threat, and we assess the risk. And as Carl explained, when you link the vulnerability, we can have vulnerability paths. So you can have attack paths linking different vulnerabilities. You can have or, you can have and. So you can have different attack paths for a particular threat. And because we can link with the vulnerability, and that's really, when you have a vulnerability, it increases the likelihood of exploit. That's why vulnerability is explicit there. Another reason is we can use CVSS calculator to calculate the severity, and then we can add it together. Again, the vulnerability here is optional in this equation, because when you, for example, you're designing a new product and you do threat modeling at this time, we want to do as early as possible, right? At this time, there may be no explicit vulnerability, right? Why do you want to build a vulnerability intentionally, right? So in the equation, vulnerability, if you don't have, or if you don't know, it can be zero. So as I said, we continuous improving the tool. As part of the continuous improvement, and last year, we were looking at the different actually we're looking at the different risk assessment tools and also a different way of calculating the risk. And then we decided to improve this tool because we still think it's more comprehensive. But we do find when we look deeper into the equation, we do find its accuracy can be further improved. So let's see. Yeah, I'm explaining the process, the thinking process, and the research we have done. So here are some snapshots of, you saw the video, and so that's a different page. And remember, in the asset page, there's, you can specify the assets and also the properties, security properties of the assets. And then in the likelihood page, you have opportunities to answer all these questions. On the right-hand side is the CVSS V3 base score. So it's basically you also answer the questions, right? And so these are the questions: attack vectors, attack complexities, and etc. And then on the right-hand side, there's scope, confidentiality, integrity, availability. So we can here intuitively see there's some overlap, right? Because when we do the risk calculation, we include the CVSS scores. And when you calculate CVSS scores, there, these like confidentiality, integrity, etc., we already considered. Right? It may not be a big deal, but we just want to improve to make it more precise. So we did some comparison, and we list in this table. On the left-hand side, that's the tool. We call it ISRA, Information Security Risk Assessment. And so the different factors, right? We already considered the CIA and CVSS V3 also considered. And there are some factors, they are not exactly the same, but they're kind of similar, okay? So now we're thinking, how do we still include vulnerability factors without overlap? So that's the difficult part. We have thought a lot, discussed for a long time. So at the end, that's what we decided. Instead of taking the CVSS V3 score directly, we'll take its factors. And in CVSS V3, there are two new factors, actually, if I go back to here. If you look at the base score, if you're familiar with CVSS, if you know CVSS V2, it will not have user interaction, and it will not have scope. And these two factors are new. And the other factors are somewhat overlap with the factors we are already using. So we want to utilize these factors. So these two factors is actually quite important. The user interaction factor is basically ask this question: if the attacker wants to exploit this vulnerability for this threat, does the attacker requires the user to interact, or it does not require user interact? So the answer is yes or no, right? You can imagine, and if it doesn't require user interaction, and it's easier, it's more likely to happen. And if it requires user interaction, you have to actually somehow social engineering to attract a user to do something, right? So that affects the likelihood. And then we want to align with OWASP. OWASP has a risk calculator. It was, I think that's the early days. It was done many years ago, and some people probably still using it. And it's a good calculator. And so we want to overlap with it. So its likelihood, it has several factors. We want to overlap on the likelihood factors. and also include the business impact, which OWASP calculator have. So the first part requires much work, so let me explain the last two first, because that's pretty straightforward. So if we align with OWASP likelihood, that means we add some factors and remove some factors from our existing calculator. And that actually required a lot of discussion, because it's hard, it's easy to add something, it's not easy to remove something, right? And then for the impact part, we still keep the current calculator as it is, because we think it's important for to know the security properties of each asset you want to protect, right? So we'll keep those. Those we call technical impact factors, because that's confidentiality, integrity. That's technical security, people speaking. And we can add, if we can add the business impact, like OWASP calculator has, but we can do not have to use exactly the same, can add other things, which it's the use the language of business risk, right? If it exists, and we can use the business impact, otherwise we use technical impact. And in practice, when we do risk assessment, sometimes the product management, they are happy. I mean, a lot of time they're happy to use the technical impact, actually, because sometimes they don't really know from the business perspective how big an impact it would be if this particular threat happens. But sometimes they have some idea. They want to use the business impact factor. Then in that case, they know if this service is interrupted, right? Especially from availability perspective. If this service is interrupted for 30 minutes, how big loss we will have, right? And so in that case, we can use the business factor. Now let's look at the new factors in CVSS v3. One is the user interaction, one is called scope change. So the answer is scope changed or not changed. So scope is complicated in a sense. It's basically saying, okay, we're doing a risk assessment for this thing, right? The thing can be a component, can be a service, can be a new feature, or can be a new security issue. So we're doing a risk assessment. Is the impact only for the thing we are evaluating, or it impacts something else? So that's the scope. So if it does not affect anything else, then the scope has not changed. If the consequence also affects somebody else, then the scope has changed, right? For example, you are doing risk assessment for your service, right? And if the attack happens, it only affects your own company or your own product, then scope has not changed. If it affects the customer, for example, the scope has changed, right? So that's the new factor in CVSS v3. The new, the v4, that's the preview, and they reconsider this. And the UI is still there, but reconsidered, but the concept is still there. And is that only for the thing you're evaluating, or it also affects somebody else? Okay. So the question is, how do we incorporate it? So as what you saw earlier, in the equation we have the vulnerability, CVSS score explicit there, and we want to remove it. but still taken these two important factors. The question is, where do we put them? And what are the values we should put them, right? So the vulnerability will still be expressed in the tool, right? We have one tab specifically describe the vulnerability. Then the question is, how do we utilize these factors? So after much discussion and experiment and reject initial proposals, right? Because we have been doing risk assessment for so long, we have a lot of data, and when we have define a new equation, we can use the old data to do experiment to see how far it's off. So at the end, we decided to use UI as a scalar to the vulnerability factors, and use scope as a scalar at the risk level, and it's the same. Apply it to the impact. And the question is, how do we decide magic numbers? Do you know magic numbers? What I'm talking about? Okay, so I'll show you. So this is a snapshot of CVSS v3 specification. It describes the formula for calculating the vulnerability score, right? CVSS is a calculator. It gives you a score. So as you can see, the scalar, the scope and the UI, they are scalars. And you can see there are lots of these numbers. You see, there are two decimal numbers. How these numbers are decided, no one knows. I guess only the people who write the specification the specification did not specify, just say these numbers. So that's why we call them magic numbers. Then how do we decide? So it's a difficult problem. It took us quite a while, but at the end, we basically use the simulation to solve them. Again, we take the advantage. We have data in the past, and we can see if it's the different numbers, if they correct the predicted result or not. Okay. So I'm not sure if we have time, we talk about a little more detail, but otherwise, let's talk about the equation first. So this is what we decided. We can so the risk will be have impact and the likelihood as we had before, and in addition, we use the scope to scale it. And you can also consider the scope applies to impact, but we don't want to confuse the normal impact we talk about, right? So the impact, as I mentioned earlier, the BF is the business impact factor. If the business impact exists, we use the business impact. Otherwise, we use technical impact. For the technical impact, as I mentioned, is the security properties of the asset we're dealing with. And then for the likelihood, if I have time, I'll actually show you the tool. For the likelihood, just like an OWASP tool, we basically have a set of questions, and that's you answer the questions, and then it will, okay. The likelihood basically comprised of two parts. One is attack factor question. The other is the vulnerability question. And so those are, after you answer, those give you some numbers. And then we use the UI factor to scale the vulnerability factor, right? We talk about if it requires user interaction, and then it's 1. Otherwise, we have a magic number, 0.51. I'll show you how we generated this number if we have time. And similarly, has scope. We also generate a number. We do the simulation. Actually, this number is actually the same as the CVSS number. So, in summary of this risk equation, we basically consider the same as all the standard security practice. The risk is the impact and the likelihood. On the left-hand side, the impact, we have asset properties. That's how we measure the business impact. And also we can use OWASP, business impact, or we can add more impact factors. That's the impact part. And then on the likelihood, we use OWASP, likelihood factors, and we add CVSS UI factor as a multiplier. And overall, we use the scope factor as a multiplier. So this is the basic composition of how we will do the risk calculation. And we have time. Okay, so we quickly go through how we decided. I'm not going to take all these details, but basically, when we're trying to decide these factors, first we already decide where it's going to use it's used as a scalar to what properties, right? And we make some assumptions based on it's in comparison with the past data. And then we run simulation considering all the different values from 0 to 1, and then we run simulation and then to see which one can satisfy our assumptions. And from there, we decide the value. So for the user interaction and for scope, it's all similar. We have assumptions, and then we run simulation to decide. So that's the experiment. And we also compare. And then, okay, we have a new equation, we have an old, which we have done. We can use the old result and run the new calculator to see what changes it result. And these are some examples. These on the left-hand side is the existing if we use the tool rating. There's not too much difference, but sometimes, but you see the numbers are somewhat different because we considered additional factors without any overlapping of different elements. Okay, I'm glad that we come to the summary. We all survived this. So again, I mentioned about the tool. The tool is open source. The tool makes the risk assessment accessible to all the stakeholders. And especially it's important from the both engineering side and product management side and the business side. And then the product management and business, they can make decisions. They, for example, they often require certain features at a certain time, but we say, okay, if we add this feature, we'll make potential security issues. Then, you tell them the risk, then they can make business decisions. Actually, this happened from time to time. I remember a few years ago, one of our product, and the product manager, he came to me and said, "Hey, Karen, I'm thinking about adding this feature. A lot of users have asked for it, and it will be convenient for the user." And he explained the flow, blah, blah, explained to me. And I looked at it and I talked with another security architect. We did risk assessment, used the tool. And so there's some potential risks. And so we told him, we think the risk is medium, right? It's not a very high risk and not critical, but there is a medium risk. It does add to your product. Now, what's the percentage of the user who has asked you for this new feature, which is made convenient? And he thought about it. He said probably less than 1%. And then I said, well, it's your decision. And he was quite excited about this new feature. And then so he decided not to do it, right? And so this is really, the feature will require a lot of engineering effort. You have design, you have coding, you have all the testing pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. So it saved the development effort and keep the product more secure. So the new, so our recent research on the risk calculation, we believe that makes our risk score more accurate. And the existing one is pretty good. I mean, it's fine, and we have been using it. And it's good. It takes vulnerability into consideration, and we want to make it better. So it has not implemented, but the tool is open sourced for both the tool and the thinking of this new equation. We welcome comments and contributions. Thank you.